Ethan woke up every day before the sun rose, the smell of sweat and red clay clinging to his skin like something inherited. He worked as a construction laborer in a small town tucked between dusty hills and stubborn trees. The house where he lived was plain, 2 rooms and a wooden lean-to where his wife, Mary, made sweets to sell at the weekend market. Despite their poverty, joy bloomed in the simple things. The coffee was brewed in an old cloth strainer, the bread kneaded by hand, and their goodbye kiss was sacred. Mary loved him with quiet depth, the kind of love that doesn't shout but stays. Her eyes whispered, "I believe in you," without sound. The kitchen floor was bare concrete, but their mornings were richer than any mansions. Ethan dressed in torn clothes but stepped outside with dignity. Sometimes he wondered what life might have been like in another place, under another sky. But Mary would smile at him, and everything made sense again. Their love wasn't pampered or polished. It was wild vine growing through cracks in cement. It was real and it endured. At the job site, Ethan did everything. Carried sacks of cement, climbed creaking scaffolds, swept dust that never ended. He dreamed of something better. A second-hand car, a brick house, a room for a future child. But each dream was soaked in sweat and silence. He'd come home to Mary, who always waited with sticky hands and tired joy. On Sundays, they'd share a slice of guava paste and talk about the future with faith that couldn't be learned, only lived. Mary dreamed of opening a small bakery, with a counter and yellow flowers on the windowsill. Ethan promised, "One day, my love." That promise became their foundation, sturdier than stone. For the poor, a promise is not just comfort, it's fuel. Even without fruit, they watered the seed with hope. And while Ethan bent under the weight of concrete, Mary carried a belief that one day he'd rise. Money was always short, counted down to the last penny. Sometimes dinner was more water than rice. Mary patched her own dresses with borrowed thread from the neighbor. Ethan glued his shoes with old adhesive and new hope. When they fought, it was over silly things. The leaky tap, the burned pot, the silence that hurt more than words. But they never went to sleep angry. Their love was stubborn. It was an unspoken vow that whispered, "I won't give up on you." Ethan admired Mary's faith in him, even when he doubted himself. Some nights, watching her sleep, he'd think, "She deserves more than I can give." But still she chose to stay. That kind of love makes cowards tremble and gives tired men the strength to fight again. They weren't rich in coins, but in courage. They were royalty. One afternoon, while unloading damp bricks, Ethan overheard a coworker talking about a job opportunity up north. A mining company hiring workers with high salaries, benefits, and housing. The words struck him like a spark to dry leaves. That night, he rushed home, eyes shining with a hope he hadn't felt in years. "If I get this job, everything changes," he told Mary. She listened quietly, her gaze full of both fear and faith. Ethan began studying late into the night, reading under flickering light while Mary made sweets and whispered prayers. She fasted for him. She believed for him. The day of the test, he left like a soldier going to war, carrying his future on his back. He returned uncertain but hopeful. Deep down he knew this might be his way out. And Mary knew too. She could feel the tide changing, but didn't know yet if it would bring fortune or flood. Did. The letter arrived on a gray morning, stamped and official. Ethan had been selected. Mary cried, clutching the paper like a holy relic. She held him so tightly he could barely breathe. "Go, my love," she whispered. "Go become who you were born to be." He left on a Tuesday with a small suitcase and big promises. From the bus window, he watched their tiny house shrink until all he saw was fog. Mary stood at the gate, waving until he vanished. When she walked back inside, the silence was heavy. She lay on his pillow, soaked it with prayers. It wasn't just Ethan who had left. It was the rhythm of her world. But she trusted the sacrifice. Mary was the kind of woman who wrapped miracles in brown paper and carried them in silence. She believed, deeply, dangerously. The first few months were golden. Ethan sent money, then gifts. Mary welcomed each package with eyes like a child on Christmas morning. The house began to change. A new stove, sheer curtains, a TV bought on credit. But with the packages came distance. The calls grew shorter, his voice colder. Mary noticed the silence growing between his words, like shadows in the afternoon. She convinced herself he was tired, overwhelmed. "He just needs time," she'd whisper. But her heart knew. A woman's heart always knows. The way he said love was different. The way he avoided questions. The way his letters came without scent. Still, she smiled at neighbors and baked sweets. Her body worked, but her soul waited. Because real love waits. Longer than it should. Even when the silence screams. Even when love is no longer mutual, but one-sided prayer. Before diving deeper into this emotional journey, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Here, every story is more than a tale. It's an open wound sewn with words. If you love real, intense stories where love bleeds but also blooms, this is your place. Mary began waking up earlier, as if silence itself needed company. The bed felt bigger without Ethan, colder too. She would sit by the window and listen to the town waking up. Dogs barking, pots clanging, radios playing old songs. But the melody inside her had changed. Though money was coming in, something else wasn't. She started noticing how long it took for him to reply to her letters. How his voice lost the pauses of affection. She'd read old notes he had once sent, smelling of his cologne, and compare them with the recent ones. Shorter, colder, like receipts from a place she didn't recognize. Mary knew the language of distance, and Ethan was speaking it fluently now. Still, she told herself that sacrifice was part of the dream, that love had to pass through the fire. But deep down, she began to fear that the fire was consuming more than just the distance. Ethan, on the other side of the map, had his hands full of gold dust and his soul increasingly empty. The mining company paid well. There were meals served hot, air-conditioned dorms, and bonuses that made him feel, finally, like he mattered. He bought a new phone, a watch, clothes he'd never dare try before. But along with comfort came a new kind of temptation. Men around him spoke of freedom like a badge. Women in the nearby town offered attention in ways Mary never did. Urgent, light, without memory or expectation. At first, Ethan resisted. Thought of Mary, of her laugh when sugar burned, of the way she tied her hair. But as weeks turned into months, and calls home felt more like duty than desire, Ethan crossed a line he thought sacred. It wasn't passion, it was escape. And it didn't take long for guilt to become a habit. He still called Mary less often. He still said, "I love you," less honestly. Mary felt it. Not in his words, but in the space between them. She would sit at the sewing table, threading needles and unshed tears. Her neighbors asked about Ethan. He smiled always. "He's doing well, working hard." But inside, she felt like she was keeping a ghost alive. On Sundays, she still walked to church, lit candles for him, whispered prayers that didn't have names. Her faith had never wavered before, but now it trembled. She started writing him long letters again, pouring her soul onto paper, telling him about her days, the birds nesting on the window, the boy who bought 3 coconut cakes in a row. She tried to pull him back with memory, tried to remind him who they were. But each time the postman came, she waited with more dread than hope, because each unopened reply became proof. He was forgetting. Ethan had begun seeing another woman. Her name was Chloe. Wild hair, sharp laugh, no history with him. She didn't ask about his past. She didn't mention Mary. And that silence became a comfort. With Chloe, he could pretend to be someone else. Not the man who carried bricks. Not the husband who swore promises with shaking hands. Just a man with a paycheck, a bed, and no questions. They met after work, shared drinks, touched without memory. Ethan sometimes thought of Mary in the moments after. The silence that followed. He would stare at the ceiling and ask himself if this was what freedom felt like. But instead of wings, he felt weight. Chloe was a distraction, not salvation. But he clung to her the way drowning men cling to driftwood. Not because it saved him, but because it kept him from facing the ocean. Back home, Mary's body began to feel the weight of absence. Her appetite faded. She forgot ingredients, burned 2 batches of fudge in 1 week. Her friends noticed. "Are you okay?" they'd ask. She nodded. But inside, it felt like something was unraveling. One evening, she found an old scarf Ethan had left behind. It still smelled faintly like him. She held it, wept into it, whispered to it. She wasn't a fool. She didn't believe in fairy tales. But she believed in their story. Believed in beginnings that meant something. And it terrified her that maybe, for him, it hadn't. Still, she cleaned the house, paid the bills, cooked for one. Hope was her prison, but also her strength. She told herself, "He'll come back. He has to." Because she didn't know how to live with a story unfinished. Then came the letter. Short, typed, colder than anything he'd ever sent. Ethan said he needed space. That life had gotten complicated. That they should pause just for a while. No return date. No explanation. Mary read the words as if they'd been written in another language. Her hands shook. Her breath stopped. She sat for hours, letter on her lap, as if it were a verdict from a court she never stood trial in. The neighbors knocked. She didn't answer. The stove burned. She didn't move. She had loved like the poor love, with everything. And now, it felt like the world had taken the last coin from her hand. Night fell and she lit no candles. For the first time in years, Mary did not pray. Because even her prayers that night sounded like betrayal. The days that followed Ethan's letter were heavy, slow, like walking through water. Mary moved mechanically, like someone who had memorized life but no longer felt it. She still rose before the sun, made the coffee, baked her sweets. But her eyes, once luminous, were now distant, as if she were looking through the world rather than at it. The little joys no longer reached her. The flowers she once tended with devotion wilted in dry soil. Her neighbors whispered, sensing something had broken. Mary no longer smiled in the market, no longer sang while sweeping the porch. Grief had taken up residence where hope used to live. But she didn't cry in public. Grief for her was sacred. It was a thing to be worn like a veil, not displayed like a wound. She carried it with dignity, as women of faith do, even when their hearts are in pieces. On stormy nights, she'd wrap herself in old shawls and sit by the candlelight, not to read, but simply to feel less alone. The silence that once comforted her now pressed against her chest like a stone. Some people leave, but others disappear while staying alive. And that was the hardest kind of absence to live with. The bakery dream was packed away in a drawer. The recipes she once tested now lay forgotten. Mary moved through the days in silence, and silence in turn settled in her bones. She couldn't bring herself to speak Ethan's name, not even in prayer. Felt like naming a ghost. But still, some nights she left a light on, out of habit or hope. She didn't know which. She reread the letter more times than she'd admit, looking for cracks in the words where truth might have leaked through. But it was final. Every line carried the chill of something buried. And she hated herself for still loving him. That was the cruelest part. How the heart can't follow logic. How love sometimes stays long after it's no longer wanted. She baked less, smiled less, dreamed less, but she survived. And in that survival, something old began to quietly awaken. A voice inside whispered that perhaps, just perhaps, love wasn't the only thing that could define her. That her story might yet walk again, even without the hand she once held. Months passed. Seasons changed. Rain returned to the red clay roads. Mary began to stitch again. Not because she believed Ethan would return, but because her hands needed to move. She mended clothes for neighbors, repaired curtains, even started making small dolls from leftover fabric. Children loved them. Her house, though quiet, started to carry small sounds of life again. One afternoon, she received a visit from Pastor Jonathan, the kind-eyed preacher who had married her and Ethan years ago. He didn't ask questions. He simply brought bread, sat beside her and said, "Some chapters end before we're ready. But God doesn't stop writing." Mary nodded, eyes full of salt. That night she prayed again, not for Ethan to return, but for strength to move forward. And that was the first real miracle. The prayer wasn't about him. It was about her. From that night on, she no longer asked heaven to restore the past. She asked only to be made strong enough to build a new tomorrow. In the mining town, Ethan was drowning in gold. The more he earned, the less he slept. Chloe had left months ago, bored with his silence and guilt. He spent his nights drinking with strangers and his days wishing he were someone else. The dorm walls felt like a cage now. The city no longer glittered. Every luxury he'd chased now tasted like ash. He read Mary's last letter again. one she'd written weeks before his cold goodbye. In it, she spoke of the neighbor's newborn, the market's new spice stand, the way she missed his coffee. It was a letter full of little nothings that meant everything. And it hit him differently now. With the silence around him screaming, her words felt like breath. Ethan realized he hadn't just walked away from a woman. He'd walked away from himself. But by then, bridges were burned, and the smoke was thick. He thought of returning 100 times. But what could he offer now? What does a broken man say to the woman who built a life in his absence? Back in her hometown, Mary started baking again. Slowly, quietly. One morning she made cinnamon rolls. Another orange loaf cake. Word spread. Orders came in. A neighbor offered to help paint the house front. A cousin loaned her a counter stand. Without meaning to, Mary built the bakery she'd once dreamed of, with pain as the architect and resilience as the brick. She named it the Clay and Rose, a nod to the earth that raised her and the grace that sustained her. Customers filled the small shop. Children laughed. Music returned to her walls. But the most extraordinary thing was what didn't return. Bitterness. Mary didn't curse Ethan, didn't wish him ruin. She simply stopped waiting. And in that decision, she reclaimed her soul. The bakery wasn't just a business. It was her altar. And every cake, every pie, was a quiet act of defiance against despair. She no longer needed saving. She had become her own rescue. Then one late afternoon, as the orange sun dipped low, a figure stood at the gate. Dust-covered, suitcase in hand, eyes sunken. It was Ethan. Mary saw him from the window, heart still. She didn't rush to the door, didn't weep or smile. She wiped her hands on her apron, untied it, and stepped out slowly. He opened his mouth, unsure. "Mary," he whispered, voice trembling. But her silence spoke louder. She looked at him, not with hatred, not with hunger, but with history. He had left a woman. He had returned to a storm that survived him. And now the price of gold stood there, unpaid, waiting. But this time, Mary's story was no longer his to finish. She didn't slam the door. She didn't beg. She simply asked, "Are you here to heal, or just to haunt?" And in that moment he knew, some loves survive. But not all lovers deserve. Before diving deeper into this emotional journey, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Here, every story is more than a tale. It's an open wound sewn with words. If you love real, intense stories where love bleeds but also blooms, this is your place. Ethan's return stirred something deep in Mary. Old wounds reopened and new fears whispered in her heart. She knew forgiveness wasn't a simple gift, but a battlefield where past betrayals clashed with a hope for peace. The bakery's warmth was a fragile refuge, a place where memories could be both sweet and bitter. Every smile she offered to customers was a mask hiding nights of restless thoughts. She wrestled with the question, could the man who left her shattered truly walk beside her now? The town watched, waiting for the inevitable fallout. But Mary was no longer a woman who crumbled under pressure. She was learning the true meaning of strength, not in forgetting the pain, but in carrying it with grace. Ethan, on his part, understood that love was no longer a right, but a responsibility heavy with consequences. His guilt was a shadow he carried, but he was determined to face it head-on. Together, they were beginning a dance of fragile trust, aware that one wrong step could crumble everything. In the quiet hours before dawn, Mary often sat by the window, her thoughts swirling like the mist over the red clay hills. She recalled the dreams she once shared with Ethan, dreams now tinged with regret and longing. But she also felt something new stirring inside her, a desire to reclaim her own story, not as a footnote to his mistakes but as a woman of purpose and resilience. Her prayers shifted from pleas for reunion to requests for clarity and courage. The bakery became more than a business. It was a symbol of rebirth, each loaf and cake a testament to the power of endurance. Yet, beneath the surface, a storm brewed. Fear of being hurt again, of loving too deeply and losing once more. Mary's faith was her anchor, but even anchors can strain against turbulent seas. The journey ahead was uncertain, but she faced it with eyes wide open, ready to fight for her peace and her heart. Ethan's days grew longer, filled with work at the mine and evenings spent helping Mary rebuild the bakery's damaged walls. His hands, once used to grasping fleeting wealth, now learned the art of creation and repair. He found solace in simple acts, painting shelves, fixing broken counters, even kneading dough under Mary's watchful eye. But the most difficult task was earning back trust, a currency far more valuable than gold. His past mistakes haunted him like ghosts, but he refused to let them define his future. Slowly, he opened his heart, sharing fears and hopes he had long buried beneath silence and regret. Mary listened, cautious but compassionate. She saw the cracks in his armor and the man struggling to emerge beneath. Their conversations, though sometimes tense, were stepping stones toward healing. Both understood that the road to redemption was paved with patience and humility. The community's whispers persisted, some skeptical, others hopeful. But Mary and Ethan chose to ignore gossip, focusing instead on the fragile progress they made each day. The bakery's success brought new faces and fresh beginnings. Children's laughter filled the air, and neighbors returned, drawn by the aroma of cinnamon and fresh bread. Mary's heart, once heavy with sorrow, began to beat with renewed purpose. She realized that healing was not a solitary journey but one woven through connection and forgiveness. Ethan's presence, once a source of pain, became a quiet reminder of their shared history and the possibility of a different future. Their story, far from perfect, was real, marked by scars but rich with hope. In this small town where dreams had once shattered, something fragile yet beautiful was taking root. One evening, as twilight settled over the hills, Mary found herself alone in the bakery, reflecting on the twists of fate that had led them here. The memories of broken promises and silent tears mingled with newfound laughter and tentative hope. She knew the past could never be erased, but she no longer feared it. Instead, she embraced it as part of her journey, a mosaic of pain and grace that shaped her identity. Mary realized that love was not about possession but about freedom and respect. She had learned to let go of control and trust in the unpredictable dance of life. The bakery's soft light spilled into the street, a beacon of resilience and renewal. In that moment, Mary understood that the price of gold was not just paid in sacrifice, but in the courage to rise and choose love again, even when it hurts. Ethan struggled with his own demons, guilt, regret, and the fear that he might never fully redeem himself in Mary's eyes. Nights were the hardest, when silence stretched and memories clawed at his soul. He sought solace in faith, in the small church where Pastor Jonathan welcomed him without judgment. The sermons spoke of grace, mercy, and the power of second chances. Ethan clung to those words, praying for strength to become the man Mary deserved. He knew words alone were not enough. His actions must speak louder. The price of gold, he realized, was living with the consequences of his choices and proving, day by day, that he was worthy of forgiveness. His journey was far from over, but the path had changed, from one of escape to one of responsibility. With every sunrise, Ethan vowed to build a future grounded in honesty and love. The fragile peace between Mary and Ethan faced its first true test when an old friend from Ethan's past appeared, stirring doubt and old wounds. The friend's presence was a reminder of the life Ethan had tried to leave behind, a life of selfish choices and broken promises. Mary watched closely, sensing the tension beneath Ethan's calm exterior. She confronted her fears, not with anger but with quiet strength. The moment forced Ethan to choose, the man he was or the man he wanted to become. He chose Mary, not out of obligation but from a renewed heart. The friend left, and with her departure, a weight lifted from their shared world. The test was harsh but necessary, proving that healing is not linear but a series of battles won with patience and faith. Mary and Ethan stood together, battered but unbroken, ready to face whatever came next. As the season changed, Mary and Ethan found moments of joy. Simple, imperfect, yet deeply profound. They walked the dusty roads hand in hand, shared meals under starlit skies, and laughed despite the shadows that lingered. Their story was no longer just about loss or regret, but about the slow, steady work of rebuilding. The price of gold had been paid in pain, but now it was being redeemed in love that was wiser, deeper, and more resilient. They knew the future was uncertain, but they faced it with hope born from struggle and grace. In the quiet town where their journey began, Mary and Ethan wrote a new chapter, not of perfect endings, but of enduring love and the courage to keep walking, no matter the cost. In every heart, there's a battlefield where light wrestles with shadow, and Mary and Ethan were no exception. The past, with its heavy chains of mistakes and pain, lingered like a storm on the horizon, threatening to undo the fragile peace they had built. Mary found herself caught between hope and fear, between the yearning for love and the dread of betrayal. Her soul was a canvas painted with scars and dreams, each stroke telling a story of resilience and caution. Ethan's presence was both a balm and a test, proof that love could survive, but also a reminder of how easily it could crumble. Their days unfolded in a delicate balance, laughter echoing in the bakery's warm light, silence thickening in the spaces between. Every glance held 1,000 unspoken words. Every touch was a silent promise of healing or hurt. The weight of choice pressed down, heavy and unrelenting. Ethan wrestled with his own shadows, the guilt gnawing at his conscience like a relentless tide. Late at night, he sat alone in the quiet church, hands clenched in prayer, voice barely a whisper begging for mercy and strength. His heart ached with the memory of every broken promise, every moment he had turned away. The gold he once chased had lost its shine, replaced by a burning desire to be a man worthy of Mary's trust. But redemption was not a destination. It was a relentless journey, filled with doubt, sacrifice, and unyielding perseverance. Ethan knew he could never erase the past, but he could choose how to live now, whether as a prisoner of his mistakes or as a warrior of hope. Each day was a test, each moment an opportunity to rebuild what was broken. And in that fight, he found a strange, fierce kind of freedom. Mary's friends, protective and wary, whispered warnings cloaked in concern. "Trust is earned, not given," they reminded her, their eyes shadowed with the knowledge of heartbreak's cruelty. But Mary was no longer the woman who hid behind tears and silence. She had become a force tempered by pain and faith, a woman who refused to be defined by her past. She faced her fears head-on, confronting the doubts that gnawed at her soul. The bakery was her sanctuary, a place where she poured her strength into every loaf and every smile. Yet, beneath her steady exterior, emotions churned like a tempest, threatening to break free. Could she truly let Ethan back into the core of her being? Or was she building walls to keep him at bay? The answers were uncertain, but Mary knew one thing. Her heart would no longer be a battlefield for silent suffering. One afternoon, the fragile calm shattered. A letter arrived, its edges worn and stained, carrying news that threatened to uproot the fragile foundation they had built. It was from a distant relative of Ethan, revealing secrets long buried. Secrets that cast shadows over his redemption and tested Mary's faith in everything they had rebuilt. The letter spoke of debts unpaid, mistakes hidden, and a past that refused to stay buried. Mary's hands trembled as she read, the weight of betrayal heavy in the air. Ethan's eyes, when she confronted him, were pools of regret and sorrow. The truth, raw and unvarnished, spilled between them, shaking the fragile trust to its core. In that moment, love faced its harshest trial, whether to crumble under the weight of the past or to rise, fierce and unbroken. The silence that followed was thick, a chasm between hope and despair. Yet, amidst the storm, a flicker of light emerged. Mary's faith, tested by fire, burned brighter than ever. She remembered the prayers whispered in the darkest nights, the promises made to herself to never surrender. Love, she realized, was not a simple tale of happily ever after but a complex dance of grace, courage, and resilience. Ethan, humbled and broken, embraced his flaws and vowed to face the consequences of his past openly, without shields or excuses. Their story was no longer about gold or riches, but about the priceless treasure of honesty and second chances. The town watched, holding its breath, as the two navigated the turbulent waters of truth and forgiveness. Each step forward was a victory. Each tear shed was a seed of healing. And in this crucible, their love was forged anew, stronger, deeper, and more real. As night fell, the bakery's windows glowed softly, a beacon in the darkness. Inside, Mary and Ethan sat side by side, hands intertwined, hearts beating in hesitant harmony. Words were scarce, but the silence spoke volumes, a testament to the battles fought and the hope that refused to die. They knew the road ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and shadows, but they chose to walk it together. The price of gold was steep, paid not just in pain but in the courage to keep believing, even when the future was veiled in doubt. In their embrace was the promise of light breaking through darkness, a promise not of perfection but of unwavering commitment. And as the stars watched silently from above, Mary and Ethan faced the night, not as broken souls, but as warriors of love, ready to fight for the dawn. Before we dive into the heart-wrenching finale of Ethan and Mary's story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because stories like this don't just happen once. They are journeys that teach us about love, loss, and the fire that fuels hope. You don't want to miss a single beat. The night had settled around the small town like a velvet cloak, soft but heavy, hiding whispers of the past and promises of the future in its folds. Mary stood beneath the vast, endless sky, the stars like scattered diamonds casting a gentle glow over the worn dirt roads where she and Ethan had once dreamed and faltered. The cool breeze carried the scent of blooming jasmine, mingling with a faint aroma of fresh bread from the bakery, a reminder that life, like love, was a mixture of the sweet and the bitter. Ethan's hand reached for hers, a touch both familiar and new, trembling with the weight of promises made and broken over years of silence and sorrow. The air was thick with unspoken words, the kind that gather in the space between two souls, waiting to be released with the force of a storm or the softness of a whispered prayer. She looked into his eyes and saw not the man who had fled in fear but the one who had fought through darkness to stand before her, bearing scars not only on his skin but deep in his soul, a testament to battles fought and lessons painfully learned. The gold he had once chased, the fleeting dreams of wealth and escape, now seemed like dust, meaningless compared to the treasure she held in her hands, a fragile, renewed bond, trembling yet alive. And in that truth, Mary found a power she never expected, the power to forgive, to heal, and to love with a fierceness that could burn away all shadows that once threatened to consume her. But just as their fingers intertwined, a whisper of doubt fluttered in her heart, a shadow cast by years of pain and broken trust. What if this was just another chapter in a story destined to end in heartbreak? Ethan's eyes caught hers, wide and searching, and in that silent exchange, a decision was made. Not born from certainty, but from courage. The courage to leap into the unknown, to trust despite the risks, to believe in something greater than fear or regret. Their hearts beat as one, fragile yet unyielding, breaking free from the chains of the past, daring to dream of a future where love was not measured in gold or promises but in moments of truth, tenderness, and unspoken understanding. Around them, the world faded into a symphony of possibility, the soft murmur of the night blending with the first faint songs of awakening birds, a reminder that every ending carried within it the seeds of a new beginning. As the first light of dawn painted the sky in hues of pink, lavender, and gold, Mary whispered a vow, not just to Ethan but to herself. A vow to embrace love in all its messy, beautiful imperfection, to choose hope over fear, to stand strong even when the road ahead seemed uncertain and fraught with shadows. Ethan, with tears glistening like morning dew in the corners of his eyes, promised to walk beside her, not as a savior or a hero, but as a partner, equally broken and equally brave, willing to face the unknown with open hands and an open heart. And there, under the awakening sky, two souls once lost in the wilderness of pain and regret found a way home. Not a perfect home, but one built on honesty, vulnerability, and relentless hope. Their story would no longer be about the price of gold, but about the immeasurable worth of love, the kind that endures storms, defies odds, and transforms even the deepest scars into marks of grace. So, dear friend, if this story moved your heart, if you believe in second chances and the power of love that fights to live, subscribe now. Join a community where stories breathe life into hope, where every like and comment helps light the path for others seeking their own redemption. This isn't just a tale. It's a call to all who dare to love fiercely and live boldly. The journey continues, and you're invited to walk it with us, hand in hand, heart to heart, because in a world hungry for truth and heart, love is the ultimate treasure. And here, you'll always find a story worth believing in. As a new day dawned over the sleepy town, a gentle warmth wrapped around Mary and Ethan, promising that every scar they carried could one day be healed by the grace of time and unwavering commitment. The bakery's soft light spilled onto the cobblestones, a symbol of life's simple joys that persisted despite the storms they had weathered. Mary, standing at the threshold of this renewed life, felt a profound peace settle over her. A peace born not from certainty, but from acceptance of love's imperfect beauty. In Ethan's presence, she rediscovered strength she thought long lost, a strength born from the shared trials and quiet victories that had shaped them both. They had learned that love was not a fairy tale scripted in flawless perfection, but a living, breathing journey of two flawed souls choosing each other every day. In the quiet morning, their smiles spoke volumes, words unnecessary because their hearts finally spoke the same language of hope, forgiveness, and daring to dream again. Yet even in this tender awakening, the shadow of the past lingered like a ghost, reminding them that trust, once broken, is not easily mended. They knew that tomorrow would bring challenges that would test their fragile bond, moments when doubt and fear would creep back like unwelcome guests. But what set them apart now was the choice to face those fears together, arms entwined and spirits unyielding. They were no longer prisoners of past mistakes, but warriors of a love reborn from ashes. Every glance, every touch carried the weight of promises to be honest, to communicate, and to fight for what truly mattered. A future where they could be imperfectly whole together. Theirs was a love forged in the crucible of pain, tempered by grace, and fueled by an unshakable faith in the power of second chances. In this fragile new beginning, they found courage, not to erase what had been but to build something stronger on its foundation. As the town slowly awakened, carrying with it the hum of life and endless possibility, Mary and Ethan stepped forward, not just as lovers reunited but as two souls transformed by trials, hope, and the relentless pursuit of what is real. Their story was no longer a tale of loss or greed, but a testament to the unbreakable human spirit's capacity to forgive, heal, and love deeply against all odds. And so, under the awakening sky, they chose to walk hand in hand into the unknown future, not because the path was easy, but because it was theirs, etched with every tear shed, every fear faced, and every moment of courage that made their love worth fighting for. To those who watch and wonder if love can truly conquer all, Mary and Ethan's story whispers a powerful truth. Love is not flawless, but it is fierce, resilient, and ultimately the greatest treasure we can ever claim.